this country is at war with Germany.
We had to do a job, and we did the job, and that was it.
The men had to go and fight, and the women had to take their place.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the Great Crusade.
Hello and welcome back to Foxhole Chat. This week we're kind of doing a bit of a twist. So we're going to be looking at some modern day companies that were also around during the Second World War. And as soon as I said that, some of you might have already twigged as to which ones we might talk about. But this was really, really interesting to dive into and see how some companies are very open with the history, and some are not so open, which was very, very intriguing. Would you agree with that, Katie? Do you find it interesting on that front?
Yes, I certainly did. Some companies were very forthcoming about what they did. Others very much not so much.
Yeah.
Can't imagine why.
Yeah, no, I've not got a clue.
Who wants to go first?
Do you want me? I'll start with Rolls-Royce, because Rolls-Royce obviously is super famous. Nowadays, you think, big luxury cars, and, aircraft engines for commercial jets. But rewind all the way back when, if we go all the way back to 1904 to their creation, very famously, it was kind of a mix of two engineering minds, really. It was developed from the electrical and mechanical business. So you've got Henry Royce, who set up his business, and then he met Charles Rolls, and they decided to kind of collaborate. And, it's the famous saying, when Rolls met Royce. So they started making kind of luxury motor cars, in the beginning of the 19th century. And kind of went on from there, really. So at the beginning of the First World War, Royce responded to the nation's need for military aero engines by designing the Rolls-Royce Eagle. So if you think we ended up with the Merlin and the Griffin, but rewind, we've got the Eagle as the first kind of aero engine. And it was their first aero engine they would produce. This, like I said, they started off making cars. Two Rolls-Royce Eagle engines were going to power the first transatlantic flight, actually in 1919, which was used on the Vickers Vicky heavy bomber, which is a nice mix between Vickers, which we might dive into in a moment. And then kind of fast forwarding on after the First World War, in 1931, Rolls-Royce established a new world airspeed record of over 400 miles per hour with the R aero engine. And this, very famously, was to power Britain's entry into the International Schneider Trophy Seaplane Contest, which, if you know your history, that you know where this is going. Because during the Schneider Trophy, that was obviously Supermarine, very famously built that. So again, it's already that you can already see the writing on the wall. It's the mix of Vickers and Rolls-Royce, and then Supermarine and Rolls-Royce. It's all coming together. So after this, Rolls-Royce then it would go on to establish further world records on both land and water. And this kind of provided the technological foundation for the development of the Merlin, a liquid-cooled V12 piston aero engine. And obviously then, very famously, during the Battle of Britain in 1940, the Merlin engine was then used to power Britain's Hawker Hurricane, obviously the often unsung hero of the Second World War, and the obviously super famous Supermarine Spitfire, my all-time favourite aircraft and the greatest single-seater fighter that has ever been produced. And I will not hear a word against it in any way, shape, or form. And I will not take counter arguments to that. You can keep your P-51s. The Spitfire is the best. But anyway, enough of me glazing on about the Spitfire. Let's get back to Rolls-Royce. As demand grew for aero engines, the Merlin transformed from it meant that the Rolls-Royce themselves developed from a relatively small company into a major kind of contender for aero propulsion. So, the Second World War is kind of known as a super technologically advanced war. If you think about it, we went all the way from biplanes to the jet engine at the end of the war, and Rolls-Royce were directly involved with this. So, during the Second World War, they began development of the aero gas turbine, pioneered by Sir Frank Whittle, and he is actually said to be the engineer who invented the jet engine. But I'm sure the Germans would try to claim that they invented the jet engine with the ME-262 jet. When things like that happen, there's always going to be claims. No, I was the first. No, I was the first. But we can all take it with a pinch of salt, and two people can have the same idea, but we got there first. And then obviously, the war ends and peacetime becomes and transitions. And like I said before, Rolls-Royce transitioned back into what they knew before the war, which was luxury cars. And they still carried on making aviation engines for commercial jets, arguably the most famous being the Olympus engines that were fitted to Concorde. And I didn't actually know this, but this is a fun fact. Apparently, they also make naval engines, such as the one fitted to HMA Daring. Did not know that. Did not know that at all. And as well, they're still involved in the military in some capacity today. So a combination of being a commercial engineering company with a military arm. So apparently they are still involved. They make the engines for the short takeoff and vertical landing variant of the Lockheed Martin's F-35B Lightning, which is cool. I've always loved, with the Harrier, that it could take off vertically. So for them to still be involved, it's a nice tie-in. They went back to their roots, but then because they had a development arm of kind of involved in the military, they decided to carry that on. And it makes sense if you've got the knowledge and the know-how and the production capability. Why would you not?
Why would you
not?
Yeah.
Yeah. But Rolls-Royce is still a super well-known and very cool brand as well.
Certainly is. You mentioned Vickers. Vickers
I did.
Armstrong.
I did.
So let's take a look at Vickers. So it did start off as Vickers, going back all the way to 1829. They first started making steel castings and then quickly became famous for casting church bells. So after various name changes, various name changes, 1868 they started manufacturing machine shafts and then marine propellers, a forging press. 1988 they started producing the first armoured plate. 1890 they were producing their first artillery piece. 1896 Vickers Son & Co. brought the guns and ammunition part. So they then started producing machine guns amongst other weapons. That's where it became Vickers Armstrongs, I believe. So by 1914, the outbreak of the First World War, they were specialising in armoured plates, guns, marine shafts, railway material, electrical machinery, ships of war, and commercial and motor cars. So they have many, many strings to their bow.
They really
at this
do.
point.
Yeah.
World War One is well and truly underway. Vickers are building battleships and submarines, merchant ships, a large type of naval guns, airships, howitzers, and projectiles of all types. So they basically did it all.
They really did. Yeah.
So World War One ends. Vickers Armstrong took over various companies throughout the years that had gone bust, and took over companies that Vickers themselves specialised in, so they could just keep the production going.
Yeah.
So 1924, work on a Vickers aircraft development was largely commercial, but they did produce a fighting reconnaissance machine on the commercial side of things, which was used by squadron leader McLaren which made his courageous but unfortunate attempt to fly around the world.
Oh,
So he didn't make it.
no.
But
Oh dear.
Vickers were creating aeroplanes at this point. So fast forward to 1939, outbreak of World War II. By government request, all aircraft construction activities transferred to Vickers Armstrong.
Yes.
So at the outbreak of war, Vickers had 95,000 people working for them.
Goodness.
By 1943, at its peak, it had 170,000. And then 1944, and by the end of the war, it had 145,500.
Good Lord.
So it was a massive employer
Mm.
within the country as well. So that's always a bonus.
Yeah.
So here's some numbers. By the end of 1944, the company had built 188 warships,
Oh,
including battleships and aircraft carriers, as well as 28,000 aircraft, and repaired a further 9,000. The company also manufactured 6,200 tanks, as well as many other vehicles. The company also produced major weapons, including massive bombs, as well as 14,000 guns for the Navy, and 150,000 guns for other services, and a huge amount of ammunition. So without Vickers, in World War II, we might have struggled somewhat by the sounds of that.
Absolutely, yeah. They were a juggernaut, and I mean, I petitioned to bring them back now because we're in we're in dire straits. I mean, can we have some of them ships back? Can we travel back in time and get them, because we desperately need them nowadays. But yeah, I think you're right. That's a bit of an alternate timeline that you could go down, couldn't you? If Britain didn't have Vickers, what would have happened? What would have happened? Yeah.
So in the background of all of that, they were also developing a tank, a bit privately, and that's a Valentine tank. So that came from Vickers Armstrong roots. After the war, they continued with aircraft, general engineering, steelworks, and railway construction. But by 2004, so reasonably recent, Vickers was no longer around. It was brought out by Alvis and Rolls-Royce.
Yes. It's funny you should mention. So kind of as I was reading this, I was remembering, and I researched a little bit as well. So like, I found out that in the 1970s, a lot of companies ended up amalgamating, and like you say, Vickers kind of ceased to exist really. But apparently, I read that under the terms of the 1977 Aircraft and Shipbuilding Industries Act.
Who knew that was a thing?
I know, right? Yeah. So this, it's very confusing. So bear with me on this one, listeners. So BAC, that's the shipbuilding part, I assume that's how I understand it, was nationalised to become part of British Aerospace, which then later became BAE as it is nowadays. So my granddad, he actually worked at British Aerospace, so just before it became BAE. And by the power of editing, I will have sent Katie a picture of the cutout from my Tides overalls. Actually, that I was going through some stuff just to sort stuff, adult stuff, and I came across it and I thought, oh, that's amazing, and I'm glad I kept it. So it's nice that I kind of have a tie in a way that my granddad kind of, in one way or another, was kind of involved in Vickers towards the end of its life, and was involved in aerospace really. And I think that's where my love of the RAF and Spitfires come from. So that's a nice little personal tie to this story.
Yeah, I think Vickers and Rolls-Royce is one of them that you either have somebody in the family that worked there, or somebody that works there. So Rolls-Royce is a relatively local company to me in the Midlands. It's like pretty much everybody knows somebody that works at Rolls-Royce.
Yeah, yeah, but it never like comes to fruition. It's not like, oh, can you get me one of the cars? Just steal one of the keys. It's never.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Be fine.
So with covering kind of two allied companies there, should we switch over to the other side of the coin, and we will
Yep.
talk
Let's
about
do it.
the Germans? And yes, this is where we alluded to before. So obviously Rolls-Royce very open about what they did during the war. Same, you can find loads about Vickers Armstrong of what they produced. But on the other side of history, some of the German ones were more forthcoming, others were not. So the first one I found, I dived into BMW, which they're very, very open on their website. They have a whole section on their website. Literally, you just go on the general BMW website and you can find this. And it says about obviously what they did during the war, but then it says about what the work they did after the war to kind of make amends for what happened during the war and how people were treated in the factories, which I think is very, very commendable. Because yes, as we look into other companies, we'll find out maybe they weren't so active in righting their wrongs. So let's dive into BMW. So they're not as, you look at Vickers Armstrong and like you were saying, they were from the 1880s. BMW was kind of around the First World War time from what I could find. So, and it was actually called BFW originally. And that was founded on the 7th of March in 1916. But a year later, in 1917, that's when they changed to BMW, and that's where the BMW logo that we now know originated from. And apparently, I didn't know this, that logo actually incorporates the Bavarian state's colors. So I didn't know that their state colors were blue and white, but apparently they are. They only became an automobile manufacturer in 1928, so they were kind of a bit late to the game, really. Like we said before, Rolls-Royce was quite early, beginning of 1900s. And actually, a funny tie was that the first BMW small car was built under license from the Austin Motor Company, which, if you know your history, Austin is a British brand. And then kind of fast forwarding, under the National Socialists, BMW was turned from a automobile manufacturer into an armaments factory and became a key player in Germany's war economy. So obviously kind of similar to, the ones that we've covered before. They were acquired rather than Vickers and Rolls-Royce. That was just I think they recognized the writings on the wall and they changed. It wasn't like it was forced upon them, but I think researching the German side of it, their companies were, no, you're going to do this for the German war effort. You don't really have a choice. You got to do it or you'll be kind of punished, really. So under the National Socialists, production of motorcycles and cars continued, but the lion's share of the revenue was generated by the aero engines. And as the country armed itself, BMW set up numerous new plants and ramped up production significantly, obviously. And going back to the aero engines, the most famous one, or one of the most famous ones, is obviously the Focke-Wulf 190 was powered by a BMW aero engine. And also, unfortunately, it's kind of the other side of the coin, like I said before, women were used a lot in the war effort on the Allied side and the German side. But it's a bit of a slippery slope with women in Germany, because you hear about, I remember reading or hearing that women were granted a medal if you had so many children to kind of carry on the Aryan race. So, but I think that came later. I think the women were used at the beginning and put into the workforce. But then I think as the war progressed, they realized, no, we can use kind of POWs and, prisoners, and that's what we'll use. We'll save the women to carry on the Aryan race, and use other means, really. And speaking of that, actually, yeah, in late 1939, they started using Polish prisoners of war in their factories. And then a few years later, from 1941, BMW recruited prisoners of the SS, as well as from concentration camp prisoners from 1942, which is obviously a very, very horrible thing. You know, that's the dark side of the war, isn't it, really? But again, like I said before, this came from BMW's website. They were very open with putting this information out there, which I think is very, very commendable. And kind of flitting back to what they produced. So they produced, like I said, the aero engines for the FW190. They also manufacture motorcycles like the BMW R75 for the Wehrmacht. And from 1938 to 1940, it made the standard BMW 325 passenger car for them as well. So often, when I read this, I thought of Indiana Jones. I think it's The Last Crusade with the bike chase scene. I was like, oh, they're probably BMW motorcycles. So that's if you've watched Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade and you see that scene, they're probably BMW motorcycles. So actually, in 1941, the government ordered for BMW to cease automobile production, leaving the company to fully focus on the production of military armaments. So again, it's that kind of forcing them to, nope, you will do what we will tell you to do, rather than, my understanding of the Allies was, listen, we've got this problem. We need you to, so we're the Battle of Britain is raging. We need more fighters. Can you make more fighters? Whereas the German side of it was very, no, you will do this. Otherwise, you're going to be thrown in the prison camps with the rest of them. And very similar to Rolls-Royce in more modern times, they completely just went away from the military arm, and they just make motorcycles and cars now. But like I keep banging on about, they're very forthcoming with the work that they did after, and I think they had a lot of campaigns and they raised a lot of money for the surviving victims of the forced laborers, really, which was very, very nice to see. It was nice that they would do that. So yeah, that was a bit of a look at BMW, one of the first German side of things to look at.
Yep, and another German company we're going to look at is Porsche. So Ferdinand Porsche started working on electrical vehicles just before the World War War. World War? The First World War. So by the outbreak of First World War, Porsche was already winning admirers with his groundbreaking designs for military vehicles. He designed a powerful tugs with four-wheel drive towing artillery through the fields. So World War One was very unmechanized. So having a great big tug, and I mean they were big, a picture will magically appear through editing again. But it was huge. Some of them were dubbed the Goliath because they weighed 10 tons.
Oof.
They had a wheel diameter of 57.5 inches.
Good God.
The wheels were cleated, so it could provide the tug with traction on the mud and sort of spread the weight out, sort of thing. And it had a top speed of 9 miles an hour, even in the mud. So slow progress, but
yeah,
it's a big bugger from the picture. By the end of the war in 1918, Ferdinand had well and truly established himself as a leading Ferdinand had well and truly established himself as a leading engineer. This gained interest from several leaders around Europe, as you can imagine. Despite Ferdinand founding his own company, Porsche, in 1931 with his son Ferry. Poor sod, being called Ferry.
Yeah.
One of the interesting parties was Joseph Stalin.
Oh, okay.
Who wanted to significantly boost the industrial capabilities of the Soviet Union. So, Soviet representatives visited Porsche at his Stuttgart headquarters and invited him out to Stalingrad to meet Stalin himself. There, Stalin offered Porsche a job as General Director of Development of the Soviet auto industry.
Wow, what a mouthful.
It
Try
was.
fitting that on a banner. Good Lord.
So it was a role that Ferdinand Porsche took his time to consider, but eventually declining on the grounds that he couldn't speak Russian. I imagine that would be a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
So fast forwarding, Hitler is now in power. His vision for New Germany was to build an affordable motor vehicle for the population. He asked the entire German automotive industry with creating it. Porsche Porsche submitted his designs in 1934 and in 1935 and was awarded the contract because he impressed Hitler. So the Führer was so impressed that he wanted to name the Wolfsburg factory that the car was being built in the Porsche plant, but Ferdinand rejected the offer and the name was changed to the Volkswagen plant. So Volkswagen meaning people's car.
Yeah.
Obviously we know Volkswagen today as well.
Yeah.
So tensions start rising in Europe. Obviously the war starts, 1939. The huge purpose-built and Nazi party funded Volkswagen manufacturing plant in Wolfsburg was quickly turned into a natural base for the building of military vehicles. So Ferdinand was prominently based there throughout the Third Reich's effort and appointed head of German Tank Commission. As you do. So you've gone from building little electric cars in the early 1900s to building big-ass tanks.
Yeah. Quite the jump.
It certainly is. So much like World War One, Porsche's engineering was repeatedly called upon for military innovations, both land and in the air. However, World War II would see Porsche excel in water as well, thanks to the invention of the Schwimmwagen.
Did not know that.
Yep. So, for those that don't know, they're military vehicles. You've got the Kübelwagen and the Schwimmwagen.
Of course.
They're basically the German version of the Jeep.
Yes, of course.
And your Schwimmwagen has basically got two propellers on the back, so you drive it down the ramp or down the bank into the water, drop the propellers, and then you can just float across the river, and then pull the propellers back up, and then you're off driving away.
It's not a super invention now. It's like the Germans have gone, right, we need a vehicle that goes in water. What shall we call it? Yes, Schwimmwagen. Yes, Schwimmwagen. Yes, I like that name. And then the whole big cat or tiger. Panther. Okay. Yeah. Hitler liked big cat.
Considering everything was over-engineered, they're very simple creatures when it comes to naming things.
Exactly, because what I don't know, Kübelwagen is probably, I don't know, it's probably like land, I
see it will translate
land
to something.
Wagon. It's gonna be like land wagon, isn't it? Yeah. Oh dear.
They're basically based off the Volkswagen Beetle chassis.
Yeah.
So if anybody's got a Volkswagen Beetle sat in the garage, you might well be able to create a Kübelwagen or a Schwimmwagen from it because they're basically the same.
Yeah.
Just the World War II version is a 4x4 version.
Yeah. I still I know they remade the Beetle in the early 2000s, didn't they? And then later in I don't know what year it was, maybe the 2010s or something like that. And every time I see one, I see one every now and again, and I hate them.
Yeah,
I just think why would you carry on making something that the origins of? Because we know, I love telling people as well that it was a myth. No one ever got a Beetle. It was a complete proper. It was like, oh, if you work hard, you can get this car. It never happened. And it being associated with what it's associated with, Like, why would you still make that? And I know some people would say, "Oh no, yeah, but well, it's not that anymore because it's a modern version." It's like, and maybe it's just how I am, and like I can't separate the things. I can't be, oh, it's a nice funky car. It's like, yes, but do you know the origins? You don't know the origins, do you? I don't know.
My neighbour's got an old Beetle, sort of like
Ah,
possibly 50s, 60s.
okay.
And it does look nice. It is good.
Hmm.
I do like them on that point.
Not for me.
Um,
Not for me.
but just digressing slightly, Kuba Vargas are expensive, like original
Yeah,
ones.
I can imagine.
Last one I saw went for about 85 and a half grand.
But compare that to what's like a Jeep, like an Ally Jeep.
Uh,
Any idea?
20 less, just under 25.
That's not bad. That's not bad. And
So yeah,
I think if you're that way inclined to admire German engineering, let's put it
mm,
that way. You're going to want to pay that. But I think I'd rather have an Ally Jeep personally.
yeah. You can get reproduction Kuba Vargas with which are about 6 grand. So
Oh,
they're
hmm.
considerably. So I think that basically is a Volkswagen Beetle with the Kuba Wagen tub on it, basically.
Do you know what? I'd rather that. I'd rather people make reproductions. Just get rid of the Beetle, scrap them all. And
Yeah,
if you want to make a Kubelwagen for your reenactment group, go right ahead. You've got my
yeah,
approval.
go for it. So these swim wagons were used all over Europe to patrol seas territories. They were actually meant to be part of the offensive to cross the Channel to Britain. So Operation Sea Lion. I'm not sure I'd want to cross the Channel in a swim wagon.
No,
No,
no.
I'm not even sure I'd cross the canal in the swim wagon, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, like crossing the channel is
Mm.
perilous enough in a giant ferry,
Yeah,
nowadays. It's that they still rock about, in the waves. And so what it would be like in a Schwimmwagen, don't want to know. Don't want to know.
yeah, sod that.
Yeah.
Anyway, uh, Hitler needed a machine that was a step up from the Panzers. They had to be heavily armoured to fend off attack from other tanks, capable of speeds of up to, he wanted 40 miles an hour, and equipped with a more potent cannon that was dangerous over greater ranges. So Hitler wanted the 88mm cannon, which was used as an anti-aircraft gun, to be mounted on a vehicle, and itself required a bigger tank to accommodate it. It meant a larger turret and a bigger, wider hull. Hitler tasked both Porsche and Hansel. Can't quite remember what Hansel was doing in amongst all of this, but obviously he was a tank developer of some sort. With developing separate prototypes in a bid to win the commission for the heavy tank. The vehicle needed to be ready for the German army to use on the battlefield by summer of 1942. So the Hansel tank was designed, the Tiger H, and Porsche's designed the Tiger P. Ferdinand, calling on his title as head of German Tank Commission, assembled the prototypes much quicker than Hansel did, basing his design upon a previous Leopard tank. So the tank had two air-cooled Porsche Type 101 engines mounted in the rear of the vehicle, powering two generators, which turned and drove two electrical motors that sent full power to the tracks.
Again,
There you go.
overcomplicated.
Yep.
Overcomplicated.
But the genius of Porsche's radial designs on paper could not translate onto the battlefield. Numerous prototypes were dogged with problems such as breakdowns and onboard fires. The heavy 45-ton tank also struggled with power to lift ratio on the softer ground. So basically, it was too big and it sunk.
Yeah.
As such, Hansel and his team actually won the contract to build the new tanks. Nearly 100 Tigers were already in production by then. Though the majority of them converted into tank destroyers. So the huge 88mm gun with a 31 degrees horizontal movement, it could wipe out any enemy tank long before Porsche's creation itself was within range to fire. So that's a fair point.
Yeah. Yeah.
The new long-range anti-tank machines were named the Type 130 Ferdinands by
Okay.
Hitler himself in recognition of Porsche's work. So at least he
Okay.
got a bit
Yeah.
of praise from it.
Yeah, because I found it was kind of a mix, wasn't it, of this Henschel and Porsche. It was, yeah, like you say, they were both competing. But yes, Hitler was a great admirer of Porsche, wasn't he?
Yes. So right up until the last days of the war, Ferdinand Porsche was hard at work devising an improvised V1 rocket that could boast a further range and faster travel speeds up against Britain's anti-aircraft machines, so they couldn't keep up with it. And despite all of that, the updated V1's design remit being cheap and disposable, Porsche knew the situation for both Hitler and the Wehrmacht was by now a desperate one. The Porsche factory was bombed in 1944, proved the final straw for Ferdinand, who returned to Austria with his family. By that time, the Third Reich had fallen to its knees. Porsche was under house arrest and accepted an invite from the French military to visit Peugeot with a view to designing the Volkswagen for France,
Oh,
and was promptly arrested as a war criminal instead.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So Ferdinand and his son Ferry turned their attentions to building sport cars in the late 40s, with Ferry going on to craft the 356, and then in 1963, the legendary 911, for which the company is best known for. And
Yes.
Ferdinand Porsche died in Stuttgart in 1951, aged 74.
Oof. Oof.
So he's binging the rinner in the rinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's done a bit of all sorts there.
He has. Yeah. What I found interesting about Porsche was, interestingly, on their website, their history starts with their founding in 1931, and then there's a bit of a jump, and then jumps to 1950. Coincidentally, there's nothing else on their website, and that's interesting that they wouldn't mention that they were integral with the development of the Tiger tank. You know, it's funny that. And then what else I found? I don't know how true this is, but I read apparently Ferdinand Porsche's biographer, Fabian Muller, apparently wrote that Porsche had thousands of people forcibly brought to work at the VW factory during the war, and that these workers were made to obviously, work to build bombs and live in rat-infested quarters, apparently. And apparently, this biographer, Fabian Muller, also wrote that Porsche monopolized the Nazis for his purpose, not the other way around. It wasn't the Nazis. It was Ferdinand Porsche's. Oh, I've got a sweet deal here. Like, yeah, I'll do what you say. And I'll take the money and run, sort of thing. So, which when I read that, it kind of tracks, isn't it? If you're that way inclined, and he's a businessman. He was a businessman, before he was a businessman. After, of course, he's going to try and think, oh, I've got a good deal here. So yeah, super interesting to see both sides of the companies and how they conducted themselves, wasn't it?
Certainly was. And there's plenty more companies out there. If you know of one and any quirks they had, or anything they got up to or shouldn't have got up to, then do let us know.
Yeah.
So anything to add from you?
No, I think that's everything.
In that case, thank you everybody once again for listening, watching, doing whatever. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram. There's always more content over there. And we'll see you next week. Oh, hang on. One last thing. Completely just it came in my head and then straight out of my head. I'll add this bit in before we say goodbye.
Yeah.
The Tiger 2 at the Tank Museum in Bovington has a Porsche turret on it.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I completely forgot that. Yeah. Which is why you see the joke. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like the meme of where some guy like messages Porsche on Facebook and he's like, oh, I've got a question, I've got an inquiry. It's like, do you still make these? And it's just a picture. I don't know what the picture is, but it's of a tank.
Yeah.
And it comes around every so often and it still makes me giggle. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that was it. That just popped in my head and then popped out again.
No, that's an interesting fact and a good one to remember.
So, cool. Now I'll press stop record. Stop recording.